If you move to Phoenix, will you end up regretting it? That was my biggest fear because I knew if I didn't like it, that it could cost me tens of thousands of dollars to move back. And I wrestled with that thought for 18 years. But in 2021, I shoved aside my fear, packed the moving truck, and set out for Arizona. And I quickly learned it wasn't quite what I was expecting. So in this video, I'm going to share 5 things that caught me off guard, including one mistake that we narrowly avoided that might have sent us back to our comfort zone in Oregon. But first, a word of warning. Phoenix draws a strong reaction both from the people who live here and the rest of the country. And they all have an opinion about whether it's an amazing place to live or a total hellhole. Most of that stems from the things that you already know about, that the place is hot and it's dry and so on. What I found out is that a lot of the information I'd heard about Phoenix was true and it was incomplete. Think of it like this. When you go to the beach, everybody already knows that you need to watch out for sharks. But if you're just scanning for a fin poking up out of the water the whole time, you'll miss the other hazards like jellyfish, rip currents, a giant octopus, or pirates. Yarr. Most of the things I'm about to share with you are like those other hazards. They don't get much attention, but you will deal with them. So don't just focus on the heat. And in a second, I'm going to show you that it has a landmine buried inside of it too. But the first thing that caught me off guard wasn't so obvious, and it went against everything that I'd heard about living in Phoenix. Since I came from Oregon, people were always in my ear saying, I don't think you're going to like Phoenix. You'll be trading all the green here for a bunch of rock and dirt. Now, I knew Phoenix wasn't some desolate wasteland like something out of Mad Max. What a lovely day! But it wasn't going to be as green as the place I was coming from, and that did give me some doubt. Once we moved in though, we were pretty relieved at how much greenery there was. That is until we found out all those plants came with a price. A few weeks after we moved in, I noticed that I was really stuffy, and I figured that I'd probably just picked up a cold. Pretty soon after, my wife was dealing with it too. We kept waiting for it to go away, but it never did. And that's when I started wondering, how does anyone actually catch a cold when it's 118 degrees outside? So I went out and bought some allergy medicine, and a few days later, we were both back to normal. I was shocked because seasonal allergies were the last things I thought that I'd have to struggle with in a desert. Turns out, Phoenix has a ton of plants you won't find anywhere else, and they're going to declare war on your sinuses. Most people who move here will get hit hard by the pollen, even if you're like my wife, who had never struggled with allergies before. And to make matters worse, there are plants blooming during every season, so no matter the time of year, there's almost always something in the air that's going to bother you. So if you're hoping to escape allergies by moving here, don't count on it. And make sure that you've stocked up on antihistamines. Because even after you've defended yourself against the pollen, you've got to be ready for this next hazard. And this was something I was completely wrong about and unprepared for. When we were getting ready to move to Phoenix, my wife was pretty worried about running into scorpions. And just about every client who I've helped to relocate here had the same fear. As it turns out, scorpions don't bother us at all because we've never even seen one near the house. It's another insect that has been terrorizing us. During that conversation right before our move, when my wife was asking about scorpions, she asked me if there were mosquitoes in Phoenix. And I confidently told her, oh, there's no way. It's way too hot and dry for mosquitoes to survive there. A few weeks later, right after we'd moved into our new home, we bought my son one of those little John Deere Gator ride-on toys for his birthday. And he wanted to take it over to the grassy area of the park and drive it around. So I walked over there with him and started shooting a video to send back to my parents. And suddenly, I realized that my legs were both itching like crazy. Then I looked down and was horrified because my legs looked like I was wearing fuzzy boots because they were covered with mosquitoes. What I didn't realize when I declared to my better half that Phoenix is mosquito free, she's never let me hear the end of that, is that those nice grassy parks that you'll find in most subdivisions are actually catch basins for all the rainwater that gets dumped when a monsoon hits. After a big rainstorm, a lot of them will turn into a lake. And all that standing water is a perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. So if you were hoping Arizona would be a mosquito-free paradise, think again. Turns out even the bugs love the dry heat. And the hot temperatures get talked about all the time, but nobody really talks about what happens when the summer heat finally gets turned down. And for me, that's when things got even more uncomfortable. Let me show you what I mean. On the day I left Oregon, it was 65 degrees and misting. 3 days later, I was driving through downtown Phoenix and it was 118 degrees. I had to look in my rearview mirror to make sure that my wife was still following me in her car and hadn't turned around. When we got to the house and stepped inside, it felt like stepping into a meat locker. Then I looked at the thermostat and saw it was set to 80 degrees. So that was a bit of a shock to the system. After a few weeks, we started feeling like we were finally getting used to the brutal heat. A little later, I got excited because the temperatures were finally supposed to drop from around 110 down to the mid 90s. So we started planning some of the outdoor activities that we'd been avoiding all summer. But on the first day of the cooler weather, the minute I opened the door for the first time, it felt like somebody had slapped me with a hot, damp towel. What I discovered at that moment is that when the temperature drops in the summer, the humidity goes way up. And for me, I actually found it to be a lot more uncomfortable. I could not stop sweating, and after a while, I was wishing the hotter weather would come back so that it wouldn't be so muggy outside. So if you're someone who's coming from a part of the country where it does get hot and humid in the summer, you're still going to have to deal with it for little stretches here too. At least you can get rid of the tornadoes and gators here. But what we couldn't escape was something that hit the entire country, and Phoenix got hit harder than just about anywhere. And this actually did give us some regret about our choice to move here because it took away one of the main reasons that we decided to do it. A few months before the move, we toured a model home in Phoenix and fell in love with it. It was a nicer house than our one in Oregon and $225,000 cheaper. But this was 2021 when you couldn't just buy a house from a builder, so we added our name to the wait list. By the time it was finally our turn, that same house had doubled in price, and just like that, our dream home was out of reach. To make matters worse, Phoenix was leading the country in inflation at the time, so cost for groceries, gas, utilities, and basically everything was a lot higher than what we'd budgeted for. For a long time, people would come here because it was viewed as a place where you could get a lot more bang for your buck on your cost of living. But Phoenix is no longer the bargain that it used to be. Most of my clients are really surprised at how much it costs to live here, especially when it comes to housing. But losing out on that house turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Because now that I know the area so much better, I am 100% certain that if we'd gotten that house, I'd be back in Oregon right now. This is one of the biggest traps I see people fall into, and it's something my wife and I swore we would not do, and almost did anyway. Let me tell you what happened. So like I said at the beginning, I had spent years dreaming about moving to Arizona. At first I thought it was because I hated winter and thought that living in a warm climate would finally make me happy. But I was too scared to leave behind my family in Oregon where I'd lived my whole life, and decided that maybe it was just the house that we lived in that was making me unhappy. My wife and I were just about to welcome our second child, and the place was already feeling a little cramped, so we decided that if we had a bigger house in the fancier part of town, that we'd finally find that key to happiness. So we found a home in a gorgeous neighborhood, and for a little while that did seem to do the trick. But about a year later, after the excitement over the new house had worn off, we found ourselves thinking about moving to Arizona again. And out of the blue, I finally realized why. You see, even though I'd grown up in Oregon, I really didn't have a ton of friends who still lived there. And for some reason, my wife and I struggled to make new ones. When our kids would be playing at the park, I'd usually try to strike up a conversation with a parent nearby, hoping that it might lead to a social connection. But when I asked about things that I found interesting, hey, did you catch the football game last night? The response I usually got was something along the lines of,
oh no, I was out foraging for mushrooms in the woods, and I don't really like sports.
That's when I realized I was a misfit. I just didn't have a lot in common with the people around me, and I wanted to be somewhere I'd fit in better. So when my wife and I decided to move, we made each other promise that we would focus on trying to find an area where we had a better chance of finding friends and social connections, both for ourselves and our kids, and not just fall in love with the house. We'd already made that mistake once, buying a house in a neighborhood where nobody talked to each other, and we hated it. And then we almost did that very thing. When that house we loved shot up at cost, it saved us from buying in a place where we'd have been miserable. I've sold a few homes in that community, and each time I'm there, I never see any kids out playing or the neighbors socializing with each other, and those were two of our biggest priorities. It's so easy to get sucked in by a beautiful looking house and feel like you have to have it, but that's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make. When you're coming here from out of state, you want to make sure that you surround yourself with the things and people who are going to make you happy. After we lost out on that house, we refocused and decided we were going to buy the neighborhood, not the house. And sitting here almost 5 years later, I can say that it was the smartest thing that we ever did, because we have met amazing people and finally found the kind of lifestyle that we'd always wanted. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the right neighborhood can change your entire experience here. But how do you know where you should be looking if you're from out of state and not familiar with the Phoenix Metro? Well, that's why you should watch this video next, because I'm going to share with you some of my favorite communities in Arizona and reveal what I believe are the 5 best zip codes to buy a house.